Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, July 24th, 2025, although I am informing you, our audience, that we are taping this on Wednesday night, July 23rd, for travel reasons, and so the days may get a little screwed up as you're listening. We may refer to things as today that you will be hearing that happened yesterday, and you're just going to have to suck it up and take it because that's just how we roll. And by we, I mean Executive Editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior Editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And Matt's colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, our social commentary columnist and the author of The Extinction of Experience, Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John. I think "Suck It Up" is a good introduction to reminding our listeners that it's commentary after dark, so there are no rules.
It is late. That's right. It is Wednesday night, and we're a little cranky. We've already had some friction. We've had conversations in which at least one of us, meaning me, has admitted that I didn't know what I was talking about when I was talking about a certain topic that we will not be talking about because I don't know what we were talking about. And Matt was very scornful. So I'm going to accept his scorn and turn to him to give us a report on the news of the day, which was the follow-up by Director of National Intelligence, former member of Congress, former Democratic candidate for president, Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, letting the world know that Barack Obama should apparently go to Devil's Island. Can you please fill us in?
Well, in a remarkable press conference today at the White House, Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt basically opened the mic to Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, to further disclose additional information contributing to Tulsi Gabbard's charge that Barack Obama was the mastermind of the 2016 Russia hoax that ensnared the Trump administration in its first 2 years, 2017, 2018, really into the spring of 2019 when the Mueller report was released. And this has led Trump to accuse former President Obama of treason and a whole lot of other things. Any word you can think of was Trump's phrase in the Oval Office the other day. And the Director of National Intelligence has referred her findings to the Justice Department, which we learned this evening, Wednesday, July 23rd, has impaneled a strike force to investigate the potential wrongdoing of President Obama and his underlings. Just to kind of provide some context, because I know that there are certain people for whom the very word Russia investigation produces brain freeze. And I may be married to one of those people. So I'm trying to make it clear for everyone what we're talking about here. But in the past 2 weeks, there have been 4 different disclosures of information regarding the FBI, the CIA, and Obama. And I'll just walk briefly through all 4. The first was a CIA report written by the CIA that examined John Brennan's hand in the origins. Who was John Brennan? John Brennan was the former CIA director, a terrible person, and actually a true bad person. And this report found that John Brennan had been forcing CIA analysts basically to include false material or material that the analysts didn't believe into the presidential brief and into the intelligence community assessment. And John Ratcliffe, who's now the current director of CIA intelligence, he referred Brennan to the Justice Department, as well as James Comey, the former FBI director, for reasons that are a little bit unclear. So that's number 1. Number 2 was last Friday, Tulsi Gabbard declassified information showing that, in her words, the initial intelligence community report saying that Russia had not hacked our election system, Russia had not changed the result of the election, had been basically tossed aside or sent back in order to produce a new report at the direction of President Obama that was much more expansive and that spoke to larger Russian influence campaigns, and that included the idea that Russia had materially affected the results of the 2016 election.
But also that Russia, what it found, if I remember correctly, is that the first report said nothing about Russia wanting Trump to be president.
That gets into the fourth disclosure.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There are parts of that you could read into the second disclosure from Friday, but then there's the third disclosure, which I think is one of the more interesting ones, and that is Chuck Grassley, seemingly independently,
Republican senator from Iowa.
Oh, the wonderful
91-year-old Republican senator from Iowa.
He does push-ups and he goes to the diner with his wife.
He's very spry.
He's spry. He's one of the best. He was able to declassify FBI documents that go into kind of the Keystone Cops handling of the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton in 2016, which again, that was over her server. And remember the emails, what it showed too was just a dazzling level of both ineptitude and hubris on the part of Comey, the former FBI director. So that was 3, and number 4 was today. Happened right as we were recording Wednesday's program earlier today. That was Tulsi Gabbard declassifying an appendix to the HIPSI, which is the House Select Committee on Intelligence report, into Russiagate from 2018, but this information had been classified. We hadn't heard about it, and what it says and what she was saying at the lectern today was that basically, not only did the Obama administration change its tune about whether Russia was pro-Trump or not, right? They knew that Russia was anti-Hillary, but there was no evidence that Russia was actively pro-Trump. And then that, until Obama had a meeting and ordered a new rushed report that then came out with this stuff that said that Russia was pro-Trump and included the Steele dossier, the fake dossier about these connections. That was part of it. But how she knows this, and I know I'm sounding like that character in with the board and Parks and Rec. I know. But I've just found myself. I found myself so enraptured, wrapped by this story. So they found out that this change happened because of directions from Brennan and also they say Obama. But her proof that this change happened, that there was no evidence that Russia was actively pro-Trump, is that they found that there was plenty of Russian material that Russia did not put into the news cycle, that did not disperse, because Russia was basically saving it for when Hillary was elected. And, if I might say, what this material was, because this material made my day. And I just have to do a find here in the article for, tranquilizers. So what they found was that Hillary Clinton... Now, some of this we already knew, because it said that the Russians had said that they had uncovered that Hillary was subject to violent mood swings, which I think anyone who has paid attention to the news for the last, 35 years.
Don't make me read her memoirs. I can attest to the fact that this exists. Yes.
Or, throwing lamps at her husband in the White House during some of the scandals affecting his personal life. We kind of knew that the case. But then they said, here's a go, quote, Russia's intelligence service, the SVR, possessed DNC communications that Hillary Clinton was suffering from. Here's the quote. Intensified psycho-emotional problems, including uncontrolled fits of anger, aggression, and cheerfulness. That I didn't see much of, but that's an aside. And then they found out that Clinton was placed on a daily regimen of heavy tranquilizers. And even while she was afraid of losing, she remained obsessed with her thirst for power. So this is the information the Russians didn't put out. But I just have to say that the words heavy tranquilizers, for me, make this whole scandal worthwhile.
Can I weigh in?
Please.
Well, of course.
Okay.
I'm done with my summary.
I said that because I usually don't dive in right after Matt's summary.
Make a dive.
But we all know that when it's after dark, all the rules are
And also,
different.
can we just give a shout out? Matt took that bullet for all of us watching that press conference. Thank you, Matt.
Like I said, I love it. I love it.
I caught the 30 seconds that on special report that covered it. Here are my first impressions of this. It's too much of a maze. The fact that there are these 4 points, and each one in itself is quite complicated. It is too much of a maze for me at this time to care about.
Right.
Doesn't mean people love mazes. A certain type of person loves mazes.
Yeah.
And that could be the beginning of like a much richer story and a sort of thread that unfurls here. But for me, it is way too much of a maze. And I have to say, referring to the last podcast we did where John talked about motive, none of it goes to the idea that the Obama administration knew for a fact that Trump was not colluding with the Kremlin and yet tried to pretend otherwise.
Okay. So
that podcast Abe is referring to, by the way, was yesterday's podcast recorded several hours ago.
Right.
Podcast.
Yesterday's podcast.
The days we have totally screwed up the timeline. This is like, when you get into like a later season of Lost and you don't know if you're flashing sideways or you're flashing backward or you're flashing forward. So Matt is discussing things that happened Wednesday afternoon. Abe was talking about a podcast that you might have listened to Wednesday afternoon. We are talking Wednesday night, although you were listening to this probably on Thursday. So that's another example of the maze that we have now entered you into as we go through the looking glass here on Commentary After Dark. Here's the central point of all of this, okay, which is there's kind of a distinction without a difference of saying that while the intelligence community at first assessed that Putin hated Hillary and wanted to hurt Hillary, that the Russians were therefore not interested in helping Trump. Because if you hurt Hillary in a binary election, you're helping Trump. Now, maybe the purpose wasn't to help Trump. The purpose was just to hurt Hillary, because as we know, beginning in 2010, 2011, according to Michael McFaul, who was the ambassador in Russia at the time, Putin conceived of a great dislike of him and Hillary, the roots of which he is not entirely sure he understands. The level of hostility that Putin achieved in relation to the two of them was mysterious to him and seemed excessive. But that by the time 2016 rolled around, he really wanted Hillary's head on a platter. So saying that you, as the people who are excited by this as a means of taking Obama down, however long it's been, 8 years since he left the presidency, and like destroying his reputation or whatever, by saying that Putin wanted to nail Hillary but didn't want to help Trump, it's kind of, as I say, a distinction.
But it does get to this collusion charge.
Right. Because the active purpose of Putin wasn't to help Trump. The helping Trump was a cherry on the top of the sundae, but not the purpose of the sundae.
But let's not forget that the people who believed that Trump was colluding with Russia got a FISA warrant into the Trump campaign through Carter Page on no grounds whatsoever. Right. And then also used the Steele dossier to cook up this new intelligence report that was then told to Trump right before the dossier was leaked, and produced the Mueller investigation, which consumed Trump's administration, got Mike Flynn fired, as we were saying earlier. So, this had huge consequences. So my distinction it would be, this is really interesting information. Some of it is not new to people who've been following this very closely, like Andy McCarthy and Eli Lake. But nonetheless, I think it's good that it's out there. It go to, again, the I think the malicious activity of folks like John Brennan and Comey. But saying Obama is going to be frog marched imprisoned for an act of treason, that's a little much, That's a little much.
But it is extremely strategic on Tulsi Gabbard's part to be doing this now, because what was her last sort of spin through the public media cycle? It was her people having noticed that she had been saying things that were completely wrong about Iran and its nuclear weapons program, and being in somewhat an oppositionally defiant position, as we say of angry toddlers, within the Trump administration. This brings her back into the narrative and the fold that is the Trump world, where these sorts of things matter a great deal to certain members of Trump's base. And that, for her, strategically, internally, within MAGA world and within the Trump's White House, is probably savvy on her part.
Okay, totally savvy on her part. Trump's affections and irritations are, of course, very mercurial and quixotic. She has now done him a solid, changing the subject from the next subject that we will get to, or at least complicating it.
Trying to change the subject.
And trying to change the subject. And then also, I think, resonating something that is not new, but was forgotten and has weird resonance given what happened over the last couple of years, which is on September 11th, 2016, at a commemoration of the Al-Qaeda attacks on the United States in Lower Manhattan, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for the presidency, had a medical episode that looked pretty serious.
Caught on video.
About which we were lied to.
Yeah.
Sound familiar?
She collapsed into her car. We saw her stumble. We saw her have what looked like a kind of epileptic fit.
Well, her Secret Service had to actually pick her, hold up her body weight and put her in the car.
Shaking.
Yeah.
She got in the car, and we had 10 different explanations over the next week over what happened. She had the flu.
She's dehydrated, like all good celebrity.
Right.
Yeah.
She was still, as her husband said...
And it wasn't a particularly hot day. It was September.
Right. Her husband then said that she had still been coping with the consequences of a concussion that she had suffered in their house in Chappaqua 6 or 8 months earlier when she fell down the stairs. Now, if she, speaking as someone who has had a family member who had a serious concussion that had long ramifications, if she had a serious concussion in the early part of her presidential campaign, that was a significant matter. That was kept from us. We were not told that she had a brain injury, which is what a concussion is. It's not visible, and it's actually, it's not really entirely detectable, even on MRIs, but it's a brain injury and can have all sorts of consequences.
Right, they can't figure out what happened to NFL players with post-concussion syndrome fully unless they're willing to have their heads cut open after they're dead.
Right, but if you
recall, Hillary appeared with specialized lenses. In the wake of that, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the Free Beacon, we covered that very
You did.
closely.
You certainly did. That was right. But my point is that in the aftermath of the Joe Biden scandal,
Right.
raising questions about whether or not Democratic candidates for president might have been in the midst of a cover-up of the severity of their medical condition means something more than it did in 2016.
John, I think that's an incredible point, because that whole episode, until you said it, I hadn't thought about it in years.
Why
literally.
would you? Yeah.
And it hasn't come up at all. That news cycle, it was huge news, and it vanished, and it is so resonant now. And you also, you also have to remember that you have to pair this with when Trump walks up a ramp, that someone perceives as him doing so slowly, or he uses
he drank his water,
two
right?
hands to pull a cup of water to his mouth, right?
Right.
Then a panel of MDs weigh in, on the front page of major newspapers.
Well, look, I think this is one reason that there continues to be interest in the Russia story on the part of a lot of conservatives in the Trump base, which is people were given Pulitzer Prizes for their reporting on this Russian collusion between Putin and Trump that just didn't exist. It didn't happen. And more important, and it's the same people who then covered for Biden, or who put Hillary's health condition under the rug as well.
Hillary Clinton almost won the presidency, right? I mean, let's face it. If Comey hadn't reopened the investigation on October 28th, it is likely that Hillary Clinton would have won the presidency in November of 2016. And we don't know what condition she was in. Simple as that. And then 4 years later, we were assured that a very old man who seemed kind of off, a little bit off, but was running a unique kind of presidential campaign because of COVID, was fine. And he got elected president, and he wasn't fine. And he got worse and worse and worse and worse. And if we went back through our archives of this podcast, since we started doing a daily podcast in 2020, in March of 2020, when COVID hit, I would be interested to see when we started talking about Biden and his infirmities, because I know that we were talking about it on an almost weekly basis beginning in 2022.
Yes,
but I will bet you that well before the election in 2020, we had
evidence in 2019. Remember one of the first Democratic primary debates, he looked lost on stage, and Jill Biden kind of had to go up on stage and grab his hand.
Yeah.
So it's even before he won the nomination.
So So my point here is,
well, it's more. By the way, it's more than just the media didn't uncover this or something like that. The news cycles were that questioning Hillary's health was sexism. Right? Here's a regular headline. There's a subtle sexism in asking excessive questions, with quotes around it, about Hillary Clinton's health. This is from Vox. But if you look at that time, you see, all the health stuff was like fed into the media wokeometer, and it spit out the other end sexism. And so you weren't allowed to question it, and that's why with the Biden stuff, they didn't have the same way around it, because when Hillary ran, they said, nobody ever asked these questions of a man. Nobody ever said, oh, is Obama too old, even though he's 300 years younger than Hillary Clinton? Is George W. Bush too old? Whatever. Like, they made it into a whole thing. We never asked these questions of a man, when what was happening actually was we were starting to regularly have old we were just approaching a new era where we were going to have old candidate after old candidate.
And well, they tried a little bit with the sort of ageism thing. Remember, there was this little trial balloon of like, there's something about a vigorous 75-year-old that people don't really understand, and they have these longevity experts quoted, but they quickly dropped that because every time someone trotted Joe Biden out in front of a camera, it was pretty obvious he wasn't that vigorous 75-year-old.
But right. So we had I think George W. Bush was 54 when he became president. Clinton obviously was 43.
Young, yeah.
Right? So we had a 43-year-old president. We had a 54-year-old president. We then had a 47-year-old president who had run against a 72-year-old man, right? John McCain was going to be the oldest person ever elected president if he had won in 2008. And there was plenty of slimy talk about how he was too old. He was crotchety, short-tempered, got a man howling at moon, shaking his fist at moon kind of thing about him.
Yeah, he was kind of that way when he was younger, too.
But that's my point, right? Which is
why he was awesome. I just have to say,
that's why we like John McCain
But then we moved into a period in which Hillary Clinton was going to be 70. I think she was born in 46. So in 2016, she was 70. Trump was 74. What was Trump? No, 2016. He was also 70? Yeah, he was 70. They were both born in 46. So he was 70, she was 70. And then, of course, Biden was 78. Trump was 74. Now Trump's going to turn 79. We're in a new era in which we have these bizarrely old people running for office. Reagan was the oldest person ever elected president in 1980. He was 69, and he left office at 77. And
on both sides is the key, is that you had old versus old. That's the era we've been in for nearly a decade now, where you didn't have the contrast. You just had to pick between older candidates.
And you know what? This is now going to be an issue going forward, period. First of all, it's an implicit issue now as Democrats are talking about moving forward. And what is it that they keep saying about Zohran Mamdani and why he's so popular, if he's popular, which we don't even really know if he's popular, but why he's captured the attention of so many, or what's going to happen in 2028 with Democrats. And there's all this. We need new blood, fresh blood, young blood, new blood. New blood.
Andy Bashir just did a Vogue spread. He's another one, the governor of Kentucky. He just did a Vogue spread with his wife. Very much.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have this issue.
No, it'll be young.
Not for another 30 years.
No, what I mean is we're not. The issue is going to be that America's not going to want an old person as president. I
think it's kind of aging out. I mean, I think I've mentioned this to you once before, and I don't think you agreed with me. So that was the end of the conversation. Ahead. But I mean, I think Trump is our last boomer president.
Well, no, I think
that's the end.
Question.
Here's hoping.
So in 2028, I mean, we're it's going to be either Vance or Rubio, or they're both in their 40s.
Vance will be 44.
On the Democratic side, I mean, they're not going to put up an old war horse. Right. I mean,
but why? The reason you're saying that demographically, but I'm saying that there'll be more than demographics that play a role here, which is that it's going to be a kind of vibe in the American electorate that we spent the years between 2016 and 2028 being governed by old men. And even if you like Trump, obviously he's done in 2028, and it's enough. And there are issues when you have an old man as president. Very obvious issues relating to Biden that are now explicable as issues. But Trump's got 3.5 years left to go. And this is a very punishing, very taxing, very labor-intensive, and very emotionally wearing job. And it makes people older. I mean, Bush looked way older after 8 years. Obama looked way older after 8 years. Biden looked like he'd aged 10 years and 4.
To be honest, I think both Bush and Biden actually sort of wore it better than anyone ever. But by the way, as has Trump. I mean,
no, he's wearing it fine now. But he's
I
not going to
remember
get
when
any. The one
very
thing,
early in the administration, the Russiagate stuff came in right away, and then there was all this other stuff happening in 2016. And I remember having a conversation with you, John, about it, and I remember you said something to me like, he can't survive 4 years like this. Like, it's not humanly possible to have a 20-hour days of outrage and anger and fury and all this other stuff. And he managed, he muddled through, but yes, eventually that catches up to him.
But I don't
When
think
he
it's the
started
job.
as president. It looked like, he in particular was he was also going to rage tweet.
But you know what?
I think it's just his age.
I
I think his age is catching up with him.
Well,
it's not the job that's catching up
Trump.
with him. Yeah.
Yeah, but
we just saw that last week when they had to disclose the ankle swelling and the bruise on his hand.
In the news, that's still a story, which I think is interesting.
Right.
I think they will now start to do those stories more and more frequently. Obviously, without any self-awareness of how about the fact that they never wanted to cover that stuff with Biden. But I don't think it will land in the same way. To the point about, I think Matt's right. Last boomer president, people will sort of shrug and go, "Well, I mean, at least he seems to be able to string two sentences together, which the previous president could not."
Remember, this is the first year of this second term, or first term, or whatever you want to call it. And where it's like the job is, generally speaking, people of this age, and he will be 80 at the end of next year or something like that, do not have this kind of job.
Yeah, but you've noticed, John, he's a little different than other people.
He is, but we'll see where he is
a little
in
different.
a year and a half or in 2 years.
Today,
he is.
He had the Japan deal, and he had this AI policy he put out this afternoon with the executive orders in a speech, and he'll be truthing all night over Tulsi Gabbard and everything. He doesn't really stop.
I'm not saying that he does, but I mean, just to put a bow on this, or sort of finish where we started. The point here is that one of the reasons that this story will resonate, the 2016 Clinton mussing about, is not just because the right properly and understandably has a burr in its saddle that it has had since the Russiagate story became a major story and sort of became the major distraction of the Trump administration. And so reminding them of the burr in the saddle and how it was never satisfactorily resolved, even though Trump got out of it, he got himself reelected in matters that had no reference to it. And a lot of people who raised it or were playing in the field of it were punished for it. We feel like they weren't, but Peter Strzok was fired. Andrew McCabe was fired. The report of the IG at the Justice Department about the misbehavior of the FBI cast a permanent shadow on James Comey and the people who had worked for him. Comey was fired. People were
he tried hiding behind that curtain, but it didn't. Right. It didn't help.
I'm saying that a lot happened where ultimately they didn't get away with it. They didn't impeach him on it. Mueller wrote a report that did not.
But they felt that his re-election was stolen from him because of it.
Fair enough. Okay, but I'm only going back to say there's a reason why the story has ignited the right, but there's a reason why it may spread a little further than the fever swamps of the right, and that is, if this stuff about Hillary's health connects in people's minds to the stuff about Biden's health, the idea that the elites of the Democratic Party want to hide the condition of its leaders from you, the American people, so they can put one over on you, is not thinking that Barack Obama ran a machine out of the White House to destroy Trump's presidency before it started, and it was Obama himself who said, you do this and you do that. That I don't buy. Thinking that the entire Democratic Party was engaged in a conspiracy to cover up possibly Hillary Clinton's illnesses.
See, I don't buy
and
it.
then
I actually
Biden's
think
illnesses, I think, is more credible.
the cover of the Biden illness, I think,
Yeah.
can and should continue to be something that the American people discuss and demand answers from their leaders. The thing about Hillary, though, is that contra Obama's comment to her during that debate, she's not that likable, and her unlikability in a weird way kind of gets her an escape hatch from this ongoing discussion. She just kind of she's a sort of epic failure.
The best Hillary is Hillary drugged or drunk.
I mean,
that's the best, and so that's why this story I find so amusing that the Russians were hiding this information. I think that just to maybe segue to the next topic.
I just want to, before we segue, I just want to say this, that because of the fact, as John, you say, this is our last boomer president.
That's Matt, really. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not taking away from Matt.
It's okay.
From John's lips to God's ears, or Matt's lips to God's ears.
Yeah. The issue of covering up age is also sort of automatically now kind of wiped away. It shouldn't be as a historical matter, as a legal matter, as a political matter, but I mean as a practical electoral matter.
Unless Kamala Harris
away.
is the 28th Democratic nominee, right? Then it will still be a story because it will be about Biden and what she knew. But otherwise, I don't think it will be an issue in the 20th campaign.
And I also just want to say that, like, in thinking about this idea that Trump will be our last boomer president, while I thoroughly agree that we don't need people, and God bless them, collapsing in front of microphones and freezing up and collapsing before their limos and having all sorts of problems. I agree. We've gotten out of control. The issue is, for me, that the break between generations, between the boomers and what comes after them politically, is very stark ideologically and in style. And that, to me, is like, it actually gives me pause, even though, while I'm fully behind the idea that this has gotten out of hand, but we've got some fire breathers coming up. I
think you know what? I think that's a great point, Abe. But I will, I'm always long America. I actually think this will be a good thing for our system because I think that the parties are situated to elevate folks who served during the War on Terror and who kind of came of age post 9/11. And they actually, Republican and Democrat, their ethos reminds me a lot of the Greatest Generation. So, yes, you always will have the extremes, and you have the Mamdanis, even younger generation than the one I'm talking about, the AOCs, they're out there. But you also have within the Democratic Party figures like, Mickey Sherrill in New Jersey, or
Slotkin,
Crow, Spanberger. So I think there are going to be people who kind of, they're not going to be as frightening as some of the figures you mentioned. And I put J.D. Vance in that category too. Right. He served his country, and he has distinct views on these issues. But even he, when he's not online, has a different kind of tone and bearing than, say, his current boss.
And I think one final thing to say about Trump and Russia, even now, and it's important, I think, to note this because of things that have happened in the last 3 weeks that have gone less remarked than they should because so much else was happening. One of the reasons that I and others started feeling differently about the question of whether Trump had an untoward relationship with Putin and Russia was the policies that he enacted in his first term, where he levied severe sanctions on Russia for its behavior in Ukraine, in relation to Ukraine, harsher sanctions than Obama, who supposedly was the Obama administration was supposedly so supportive of Ukraine and the Maidan revolution, and effort and turning back and opposing what happened in the Donbass and all of this, but that they never did anything. They brought a cake to Maidan, but they didn't do anything to help the Ukrainians.
Well, this is one of the remarkable differences between the first Trump term and the second term, and it speaks to all sorts of things. Trump made a big show out of saying Obama sent Ukraine meals, we sent them weapons, right? And that was before. That was a selling point for that was before the invasion, of course.
Yeah, that was before the 2 years before the 2022 invasion, right? And we know that during the Trump administration, as Todd Lindbergh detailed in an article that we published in early 2023, there's a lot of stuff going on with U.S. military, with contractors and others, U.S. military, training the Ukrainians in techniques of warfare that they had never learned or ways of resisting and stuff like that. Okay, so that's term one. Term two begins with Trump saying that the war in Ukraine is terrible and he can solve it on the first day, and he makes nice with Putin, and he has that horrible meeting in the Oval Office with Zelensky and Vance, and everything's looking bleak and everything's looking terrible. And then, however it happened, whether the intelligence was unassailable or things that they heard on SIGINT were you couldn't reject, or it was just that Putin was so dismissive and was doing things when he said don't do them that he did anyway, that he turned. And he's not exactly, he's not LBJ building up 500,000 troops, American forces in Vietnam, but he did a heel turn on Ukraine. Now, I don't know if it's going to be enough. It doesn't feel like enough to me because of what I would want America to do in Ukraine. But you cannot deny that he is a different person today than he was on January 21st when it relates to Ukraine, which means that he is now in two successive terms, under two wildly different sets of circumstances, gone at Russia and turned America, said we are in an adversarial relationship with Russia. Did he bring a button that said reset to Russia? No, that was Hillary Clinton who did that in 2009. He has confronted
and there
Russia.
Was the transmit this to Vladimir episode, which was a very big deal at the time.
Yeah, when he was standing on a stage with then Putin substitute president Dmitry Medvedev saying, I'm going to have a lot more flexibility after the election to make deals with you. And Medvedev, who was supposedly the head of government of his country, said, okay, I'll tell Vladimir, because as we both know, he's actually still really the president, right? And that happened on an open mic. My point is that...
And that was, there was every reason to believe that was about Eastern European countries' missile defense assets. Poland.
Right.
And,
This is important because I look on social media and I see people that I respect or have respected for all kinds of reasons and for all kinds of, and people that I've worked with and people that I like and people that I respect, who are still slimily asserting, and I think it's slimy, or slimily implying that Trump is Putin's cat's paw. And it is slanderous at this point to say such a thing. It just is. You can hate Trump. You can think he's an emolument-hungry monster who should be impeached and thrown out of office and all of that. But you cannot look at what he has done, particularly in the past month, or in his first presidency, and say that he's everything Putin ever wanted in a president. Because he really isn't. And what's happening now is that Trump is acknowledging that the war is going to continue, and that all things being equal, if there's going to be a side in the war that you got to support, it's got to be Ukraine, because Russia's the bad actor here. So meanwhile, all sorts of other stuff is going on in Ukraine we don't have time to talk about. Demonstrations about an anti-corruption law being lifted, and Zelensky's first real challenge to Zelensky's rule and power in his behavior in relation to this domestic issue. But for people in the Never Trump movement, again, that are old friends of mine and stuff like that, to still play this footsie game with Trump being a Putinite is just immoral, demagogic.
So now I'll take the segue
Okay.
to the second story, because there's actually a third story that just broke while we started this. The administration is settled with Colombia, which we should talk about at the end.
Oh,
but
boy.
I also want to talk about the Epstein scandal, because there was some developments on that front as well. And we have news that the House has subpoenaed Ghislaine Maxwell, who is currently serving a sentence in prison for her connection to Epstein's crimes. We have the Trump Justice Department, the Deputy Attorney General, saying that they want to meet with Maxwell and her attorneys to talk about what she knows, what other information she can reveal. And then the Wall Street Journal broke the story this afternoon. The headline, Justice Department told Trump in May that his name is among many in the Epstein files. Funnily enough, we kind of had a preview of this story from Elon Musk, who, in the midst of his meltdown on the occasion of his separation from Trump and the Trump administration, posted on X that Trump is in the Epstein files. And according to the Wall Street Journal, that's what Trump was told. He is denied that he's told this. He's not liking much of what the Journal is publishing on its news pages lately. But it shows that this story is not going away. And so we almost have this massive kind of collision of scandals happening over DC right now. If you think of them as like big weather systems, you have the Epstein scandal, which is touching on the Trump administration. It's involving Congress. Of course, Mike Johnson sent the House home a day early because he didn't want to have a vote on amendments demanding the release of Epstein material. We have a judge in Florida saying that she was denying the Justice Department's request to release grand jury materials. She says in her opinion, my hands are tied. So you got Epstein, then you have Russiagate and Gabbard and Obama and Trump. That's there. And then something we've talked about on the show as well, we still have the Biden scandal, the AutoPen scandal, the Biden health scandal, the Biden officials coming to the House of Representatives, taking the fifth repeatedly, right? So it's a summer of scandal in Washington, D.C. And I was of the view that Epstein would be a story that maybe we would run 2 or 3 weeks, but that Trump would be able to kind of tamp down the inquiries. But it does seem to me now to have taken on a life of its own.
But I'm really curious about one thing about the Epstein thing, and I'm glad you said it's like a weather system. I kind of feel like these recent stories in the last few days are like a weird new experimental weather balloon, because in the kind of dark corners of the internet, and for people who are obsessively following not just politics but Trump and MAGA in particular, none of this is new. Everyone knew about the photos, everyone knew about all the attendance at the various weddings and the parties, and that they had socialized together. This had long been non-mainstream knowable information. And so what's curious to me is the timing of why this real push to make it mainstream storytelling. And that is new, and it speaks also to how our media ecosystem happens to be formed now, because the push is coming both from the MAGA extreme right conspiracy people who are like, we want the truth, but also from the Democrats. And I think Trump is caught in a way trying to figure out whom to address and how to answer it, because those are two very different audiences.
I have to say, I just want to add, like that's my response too. Who didn't think Trump? First of all, there's this sort of collapse conceptually between the Epstein files, which is this very broad, ill-defined thing, and the Epstein list, which, as far as I could tell, is a non-existent thing. That would, if it did exist, be a list of blackmail victims or participants, right? And I think when Musk said something like Trump is in the Epstein files, the implication that he wanted everyone to take from it was that he's on the Epstein list, which I don't think exists in any substantial way. So I agree with you. Who didn't think that it's very old news that Trump had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein going back decades. By the way, similarly, on the other side, it's not particularly new news that the Democrats and the Obama administration was delving into whatever they could find about Russia. So it's kind of a summer of recycled scandal.
Okay, but
on both sides.
Okay.
So far.
In the increasingly populist politics that we are living through, and that are by definition difficult to corral because they are populist, Trump does not have the control over this story that he might have thought that he had.
That's the key to me.
Right? And why? Because you know how we talk about the omni-cause, about how liberals are obsessed with the omni-cause? Well, how about the omni-scandal? Because Trump's in the Epstein story, and Clinton is in the Epstein story, and Gates is in the Epstein story.
It's actually hyper-conspiracy, not
right.
just scandal. It's kind of a hyper-conspiracy narrative.
A hyper-conspiracy. But the point is that the American elites that seem often as though they are at war with each other, right? That Trump is saying Obama should be frog marched to jail, and Clinton says Trump is and they all talk about each other, and Trump brings the Clinton female accusers to a debate in 2016 and all of that. And yet, they sit down at a funeral. They're all laughing together. Trump is sitting next to Obama, saying to him, I got something I got to talk to you about later. You know, people are lip reading, seeing.
We learned that they were talking about golf, incidentally.
Okay,
it's since come out that they were talking about golf at Jimmy Carter's funeral.
But they're laughing together. You know, George W. Bush loves Michelle Obama. Hang out together. He gives her M&Ms.
Not a fan of Trump.
She thinks it's really funny. Okay, but my point is, if you are one of these, if you're a person who says there is this class of people and they are running America for their own benefit, the evidence of that, which is entirely circumstantial, I think mostly is nonsense, but nonetheless, it's undeniable and inarguable that the American elite and the American hyper elite are so intertwined with each other that even at this time of extreme polarization, you can discern this pattern in which, as long as you're in a certain place, in a certain area, have a certain level of wealth or a certain level of power, you are in some kind of a club together that is very unnerving to ordinary people. And that is not partisan, and it is not particularly ideological. It's wait a minute, what's going on here?
And usually Trump isn't in the club. And and his connection to Epstein goes back to the time when he kind of was in the club. The Clintons were at the wedding, right? He was a Democrat. So that must nag at him as well. I do have a simpler explanation for I think what's happening here is that the Democrats smell blood in the water.
Right.
They think that there's something in there that even if it's hearsay, even if it's just some girl saying, oh, well, he was around here and he did this, they want to use it. And I don't even think they have the expectation that it will bring Trump down, because nothing has brought Trump down.
Yeah, right.
I mean, accusations of rape, the Access Hollywood, all these different women accusing him of groping them. Nothing has brought it down. I don't think anything in the files will bring him down, but it will be a pain. It will be a pain. It will be an annoyance.
Yeah.
It's just more ways to tie down Gulliver. And so they are pressing the advantage. And then you also have this populist desire for accountability, which you're talking about. And Trump knows that he doesn't want to give anything to the Democrats. And so he's in this position of essentially he wanted to just stop conversation. As we know, he said, stop talking about Epstein, but it's not working.
And the reason that it's not working is that you can accept that Jeffrey Epstein, okay, we're asked to accept 17 different things about Epstein, no matter who you are. Had this plea deal in 2008 that seemed very generous and undemanding, given the nature of what it was that he had accepted guilt for. And he got out, and then he continued to be somebody who went around trying to have meetings at Harvard to raise money, do stuff, introduce people to other people, that kind of thing, until he was
he seems to have been this like Zelig type figure.
Right. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Right. But even after he got out of jail in Palm Beach County, he wasn't gone. He was still around, and people weren't treating him like a total pariah. And you have to, how did that happen? How did a convicted sex offender, a man who pled guilty to being a sex offender, how is he still got all these friends in high places?
Because they knew that he knew what they did.
That's
simple.
That's
right.
a theory.
Then,
that's a
Well,
point.
it works with the
right.
theory, even with the theory not being true, which was that they had reason to be afraid that he had incriminating stuff on them, and there's no way to be sure.
Okay, so right there, you're
now we see, now we're hearing
that's
that
point
that's
number
not the
one.
case.
So that stinks. Then he gets rearrested and he gets charged again, and that happens in 2019. And 40 days later, he is found hanged in his jail cell before he can be put on trial. And lo and behold, he was in solitary. He was in a cell that's supposed to be watched 24 hours a day because he was on suicide watch. And somebody fell asleep and the cameras supposedly didn't work, whatever. And then you're being asked to believe that he killed himself, that he paid somebody to make it possible for him to kill himself, maybe. And then, so you're being asked to believe.
See, that part is
the
plausible.
more you know about
that part's plausible to a lot of people.
It's all plausible.
Yeah. I mean,
but the point is, the more you know about this story, unlike a lot of other things, the more you know about it, the worse it gets.
Well, the ball of yarn doesn't stop unspooling. That's what I think makes it one of the great conspiracy subjects of all time. Is you can just keep.
I have someone said something to me over the past week about this, because I think we all talk about Epstein as if we assume, as I have long assumed, that he was involved in some sort of blackmail ring, the sort of highest level blackmail ring that you could imagine, right? But what if he was just money laundering? Is that possible? What if, because don't forget, Ghislaine Maxwell, she's in jail for trafficking women to Epstein, not to third parties.
Right.
He had his own illness, his own pathologies. There's no question. But like, so much of this has gotten out of control because we really don't know anything
maybe they
about
just attended
Right.
the part. So
Yes.
the other thing is, like, maybe it's a hangover problem where he got enough of these people to come to his parties where it was later revealed, as you say, Abe, that he was actually procuring underage women for his own use or maybe some other
Right.
friends' uses. But if they were even in the vicinity of that, they now understood themselves to be at risk. Even if he never actually blackmailed them, he
Right.
had control and power over them in that
point
regard. He knew
about
they were there.
The point about this conversation that you, Christine, and you, Abe, are having is that this conversation is completely legitimate.
Yeah.
There is no way to shut it down.
Right.
The story stinks.
Right.
There is no Gerald Posner solution that will tell you after 20 years of 30 years of study that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
But here's the political point, though, just to close, is that the Trump administration, I think, made this mess for itself.
Right.
And it did so by overpromising and under-delivering earlier in the year, and then it did so in the beginning of this month by simply believing that it could declare the matter closed by an unsigned memo posted to its website on an evening before a weekend. And had they said, okay, look, we've gone through this material, we can't release a lot of it because it contains all these salacious pictures, which count as child pornography, and there are all these names mentioned, but in many cases, there's no evidence of wrongdoing. They're just accusations, and there's just so much material. How do we present it to the public, right? Let's have Attorney General Bondi and FBI Director Patel go in front of the public with some documents and then explain. We might not be in the situation where we are today. Instead, it was handled in this surreptitious manner, which provoked a lot of dissent from within the coalition. And Trump at first thought that he could just say, stop talking about it, and everyone would stop talking about it. But even he, by the end of last week, knew, I'm going to have to try to do something to give people more answers. They have to get to the point where they're on top of the story and answering questions. They have to do a Tulsi Gabbard. I have to tell you, Gabbard was excellent in the White House press room today. She laid it all out. She answered the questions. When she gets that kind of, that bearing she gets, like when she destroyed Kamala Harris. Yeah, it's almost regal, and she's very deliberate and everything. Yeah. They need to have someone like that say, this is where we are with the Epstein story.
Good luck. This is the political
exactly.
challenge.
That's the problem.
But the political challenge here is there's another one, which is that Trump overreached in assuming that they would do what he said, which is trust me. He's always said trust me. This time they said we want verification. And that's the first time his core believers have really demanded that of him, and he's flailing as a result. Right. I think you're absolutely right, Matt, that who is that person who could actually persuade them that what they've seen is all they can get? And that's enough.
The other possibility of where this...
I'm sorry, because I know you haven't gotten a chance to talk here, but we're like past an hour, and we really should talk about Colombia before we close, because this is a really startling story. Colombia, as we were reporting this, the word came out that Colombia is paying a $200 million fine, according to the New York Times, to settle allegations from the Trump administration that it failed to do enough to stop the harassment of Jewish students, part of a sweeping deal reached to restore the university's federal research funding. In return for the hundreds of millions, in exchange for the return of almost $400 million in research grants, Colombia will pledge to follow laws banning the consideration of race in admissions and hiring, which is kind of striking because the Supreme Court already said they had to do that, but nonetheless. And follow through on other commitments to reduce anti-Semitism and unrest on campus that it agreed to in March. It will pay $21 million to settle investigations brought by the EEOC, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It will, not only has it agreed to establish the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, it has promised to remove disciplinary actions against campus unrest from the faculty senate to the provost's office, meaning that the faculty will no longer be in charge of the disciplinary procedures of the administration of the school, but the administration of the school will. The deal is with the administration of the school, and the administration of the school is now pledged that it will obey these diktats and these rules. And this is very, very important in 10,000 ways, one of which is that unlike Harvard, which is attempting to litigate its way out of trouble with the Trump administration, Columbia, after this year and a half of hell, or more than a year and a half of hell that it has put its students through, its everybody through, Columbia seems to have sued for peace with some understanding that it has something to gain from suing for peace. By which I mean, not only will it get the money back that the administration has pledged to withhold, it has said it was withholding in grants, and will pay $200 million in a fine to settle charges relating to anti-Semitism. But it needed the outside pressure for it to get itself out of this mousetrap that it was in which it was going to be trapped and chewing off its own legs to get out of the trap over and over again, like 3 different university presidents, and all this unrest, more unrest, more unrest. And it's almost as though they are weirdly grateful that they could make this deal with the Trump administration, pay some money to say, okay, now we can't let you overrun our campus. We can't let you do this. And we had no modality, no way to do this ourselves. So,
well, they lacked courage to do what they should have always done, right?
Yes. No, ultimately it's courage, or it's whatever. It doesn't even matter. It's like they don't know whether it's courage or not. They don't know what they believe or not. Maybe they don't believe in anything really when it comes down to it, the Board of Trustees of Columbia. But they just want this to go away, and there was no way for them to make it go away. That's how I'm reading this, and it's a huge moment in this story of the last couple of years, and in the story of whether or not a campus that treats its Jewish students the way that Columbia treated its Jewish students can ever expect to get away with this. Because now that there is this precedent, every university that is being investigated by the Department of Education and the Justice Department on Title VI grounds that Jewish students were not protected, there is now this roadmap, this thing that happened with Columbia that can serve as a template for other settlements at other schools that will either have to do that, or they're going to have to try to follow Harvard's tack of spending endless energy in litigation that they might lose. Because you know what?
They don't have it.
And money. Well, Harvard has the money and other schools don't.
Harvard does, and those other schools don't have the money to do what Harvard's doing.
And you know what? They did violate Title VI, and they did discriminate against Jewish students, and they did do things that should deny them their accreditation or lose them federal funding based on the laws of the United States, given this fact. And Columbia was right to settle under those terms, because what it acknowledges having done, it did. It's not pleading to something that it didn't do in order to plead down to a lesser charge so it can get out of this. They're saying we did it. We're sorry. We're going to pay restitution. Now maybe
there's no admission of wrongdoing in the settlement, so they don't have to. They don't have to actually say.
No, they're just going to pay people tens of millions of dollars to go away.
No, but I think
that's common with the settlement.
Okay. But I think Seth's point is important, because what happens after the Trump term? It's like how lasting is it? Listen, I think it's great, and as Seth wrote in a post on Commentary's website months ago, This all started because Columbia refused to protect the civil rights of Jewish students. That's
Right.
it. That's all they had to do.
Right.
They would have retained their billions, and they would have had no problem. But if they admit no wrongdoing, technically, where does that leave us? Where does that leave posterity here? You know,
I don't know
there's
what it
also
means.
a sunset clause in the deal, which is going to make it it sunsets at the end of Trump's term. Essentially, it's like 3 years or something like that. So the question is, what will Columbia be able to do after that? I don't.
They have acknowledged.
Here's the key thing.
Breaking the law in this set. They may have not acknowledged wrongdoing, but in paying a fine that relates to violations of Title VI, I don't know what the distinct. It's again a distinction without a difference. They have not pled guilty in a courtroom to a civil charge against them.
I think what this means is there has to be some type of monitoring. And,
that's what there is in the deal. So the deal
mechanism to ensure compliance at least through the 3 years of the deal, and then we have to be in a position to continue it. I think about pre-clearance, where states that had records of discrimination against black voters had to prove to the Justice Department that they were taking the means, pursuing the means necessary to allow black voters access to the polls. There needs to be some type of mechanism here to make sure that they're fulfilling their end of the deal, or this sense that maybe Columbia avoided the worst outcome may prevail. And also, we don't know what the effect of this deal will be within Columbia. I mean, earlier arrangements, let's not forget, led to the interim president being knocked out, and then having Claire Shipman ascend.
Just to answer the questions, because these are things we know the answers to. There is a monitor. The deal does have a monitor for that, and then the other issue is the other answer is that the deal doesn't take effect until Columbia shows to the administration's satisfaction that they have initiated the deal. In other words, that not just they agreed to it, there will be a monitor in place. There will be an assistant provost who is going to overlook all the Middle Eastern studies disciplines, and that person is going to have to be in place. The administration has also gotten Columbia to share certain information about applicants and change their application process in some material way. Well, in some way, so there's a record. They ask these questions instead of these or whatever. They're going to have to show the administration that is what all this stuff starts. The clock doesn't start ticking until they show that they've put this stuff into play. That makes it harder to squirm out of, because they're going to have to, change the way that certain things are done in ways that are hard to switch back. Right. But in terms of the 3 years, that's really anybody's. Nobody really knows what Columbia's going to do, but we also don't know who's going to be the Columbia president in 3 years. That's the other thing. It's
not just about Columbia. That's why I wanted to make this point. There are numerous schools that are in the crosshairs of the Trump Justice and Education Departments on this question of the violations of Title VI that have caused these withholdings of federal grant money that really now have two paths to follow. They will either follow the path of Columbia and try to make peace and a deal, which is sane behavior, because like I say, they did it. And if they want to go on and pretend for years like they didn't, good luck to them, because there's iPhone footage proving that they didn't protect Jewish students from discrimination, and there's emails from professors, and there's grades, and there's things that were said in classrooms, and there's paths that weren't allowed to be walked down, and all of that. Or they can, like I say, decide that they want to martyr themselves and try to contest this in litigation with the hopes that they can push it so that come 2029 there'll be a new administration that might let them off the hook. But that's not a good bet, because there's a 50-50 chance there won't be a new there'll be a new administration that will follow the same precepts as this administration. And this is a very, very big moment. And final thing I want to say before we go is that I'm going to say it again. I've been saying it now for months. If you're a Jewish person and you don't understand that this administration has gone the extra mile and miles beyond the extra mile to fight for Jewish people in this unprecedented moment of anti-Semitism, when they didn't even have the real political reason to do so, given that they know that Jews did not vote in majority numbers for them. Again, if you're going to come to me and say, yeah, but they don't talk enough about how terrible right-wing anti-Semitism is, it's like, go tell your story walking. Like, go find someone else on the street corner.
John, can I just add to that and say that in the sense that the Trump administration left the known and rumored anti-Semites among the MAGA influencers out to dry when it hit Iran, and when it worked with Israel on these strikes, that in itself is actually a move against the right-wing anti-Semites in a different way.
Right. I think that's right. But I do think that it's really important that you look at this and say nobody else would have. I mean, I don't think other Republican administrations, if there had been, a DeSantis administration might have pursued exactly the same kind of had there been a DeSantis administration, but they didn't have to do this. They didn't have to focus on this. There were 10,000 other things for them to focus on that were important, and they did, and they have been resolute, and they have been forceful, and they have had the righteousness on their side. And they've done something astonishing and extraordinary here, and they are continuing to do it elsewhere. And I don't think that people are required to show gratitude. That's not what I'm even suggesting. But I think that simple honesty requires that you look at what's happened here and say that somebody stood up for America's Jews at a moment when Jews are more at peril in this country than has likely been the case since 1915, when Leo Frank was lynched in Atlanta. And that's 110 years now. And Jews have felt unsafe. Jews have felt threatened. Jews are still threatened. Jews are being murdered in the streets of DC and Denver. And, this is a real thing. And somebody is standing up and saying no to the elites that seem to think that it's okay. With Mahmoud Khalil out and about yesterday in Washington with his cute little interview that Abe wrote so brilliantly about today in his newsletter, and his appearance with Bernie Sanders and all of that. Bernie Sanders is standing there with Mahmoud Khalil, and Donald Trump is standing with America's Jews. Back tomorrow for Abe, Matt, Christine, and Seth. I'm John Pahortz. Keep the candle burning.